This is a Fox News alert. The Israeli Defense Forces have just confirmed that Hamas has released 14 more Israeli hostages today, the third day of the Mideast ceasefire, and no word on the American hostages that the White House had believed could be included today. Since Bibi Netanyahu's war cabinet accepted the deal under enormous pressure, Hamas has now released 40 Israeli hostages in exchange for the ceasefire and the release of 150 Palestinian prisoners. And of course, we're very happy for those released and their anguished families. Netanyahu stressed the war will continue.
And assure that the day after Hamas, there will be no threat to Israel.
I don't trust Hamas to do anything right. I only trust Hamas to respond to pressure.
Let's stop right there. The media should not fall into the Hamas propaganda trap that this is some grand humanitarian gesture blessed by God. They kidnapped the Israelis as a bargaining chip. The Hamas terrorists seizing 240 hostages, most of them civilian families, including very elderly people and very young infants. Think about how barbaric that is. Look at that, a 2-year-old, an 85-year-old among those released Friday. Here's Ohad Mander, 9 years old, being released, being reunited with his father. And Hamas, which held up yesterday's hostage release for hours, will use the ceasefire to reset its military and put its fighters in a better position to kill more Israelis. Netanyahu, who also came under pressure from President Biden, says after the pause, he'll resume the military campaign to topple Hamas, which, don't forget, started this war with its brutal massacre on October 7th. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is MediaBuzz. The hostage deal is drawing sharply different reactions from commentators across the spectrum.
The problem is you wonder where the Hamas fighters are going to go every time you pause. Yeah. Hey, 5 days, give you 40. Well, give me another 5 days, I'll give you 20.
A chance to refuel.
And then give me give me another 20 days, I'll give you another 10. So this is the ultimate leverage.
It's hard to imagine that the devastation of Gaza is what's moving Bibi Netanyahu to make a deal. It's the political pressure that he's under.
Problem, however, is there are 4 times that number still held hostage, including Americans.
Yes. I would say, bluntly, Hamas wins in this particular case. They get to resupply, they get to reposition, they get to improve their positions, they get to improve their sniper positions, the use of their ambushes.
There is no equivalency in kidnapping a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and in murdering more than 1,300 people and what's going on today in this hostage release. It's just beyond fathomable.
We'll go to Israel shortly for a live report, but joining us now to analyze the coverage in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Robby Soave, senior editor at Reason Magazine. And in San Diego, Laura Fink, a political analyst and CEO of Rebelle Communications. So, Robby, good news that this finally happened. It seemed like it was delayed a couple hours, not as long as the hostage release was delayed yesterday. But is the media's natural tendency to portray hostage releases as joyous, you have lives saved, you have families reunited, overshadowing what a savage act it is for Hamas to kidnap civilians?
You're exactly right. And of course, it's very tempting to be celebratory about this because families are being reunited with people they feared were dead or languishing under horrific conditions. So I think it's okay to have some recognition of this as good news for those people and for their families, but we still must be clear-eyed about what Hamas has done, about where the blame lies, and about the fact that any pause in fighting can benefit that terrorist organization, that it cannot be trusted, that it violated an existing ceasefire. That's what kicked off this whole war was Hamas's actions on October 7th. So as long as the media must continue to explain, these aren't two equal partners at some deal here. This is a terrorist organization that kidnapped people at a music festival, that shot them in their homes and in their cars and at bus stations, and we can make no excuse for that.
Could not agree more. One of the Israelis released today also has Russian citizenship. So, Laura, Hamas holding up yesterday's release for hours, claiming Israel didn't send enough humanitarian aid to Gaza before backing off. kind of manipulating the coverage as well as the family's emotions.
Well, Hamas from day one, from even pre-day one, has sought to manipulate emotions. We saw that with the fighters pretending that they were exclusively capturing and killing militants and soldiers on the Israeli side, and in cradling children after killing them just minutes before. So this is a propaganda war for Hamas. It's certainly accurate, and I think that obviously we should certainly cover it in a way that does not forget or that neglects the atrocities that led to the situation that we are now in. I think also, though, that the coverage of the issues of the Palestinian people and the casualties involved in the Israeli attacks in their efforts to eradicate Hamas also has to be covered. And I think we see some of that as well. And I want to make sure that we highlight that that is not propaganda, but that is simply a coverage of the impact of war.
Right. Yesterday, it looked like the deal might collapse during that long delay. President Biden spoke directly to the Emir of Qatar, which is acting as the intermediary in these negotiations, and then it was back on. Robby, there were protests in Israel led by some of the hostage families to pressure Bibi to take the deal and free the initial 50, which would be true if we get the further release on the fourth day tomorrow, hostages, women and children. Even though that would leave many in Hamas's hands. That's the frustration here.
Yeah, look, it's very difficult, and you can't really begrudge anyone whose own family members or loved ones are being held for wanting to do, anything possible to get them home. That's something American families have faced when American service members or people in the Middle East have been held by terrorist groups. They want to do anything possible to bring them home, and the U.S. government, has to act within reason. Can't sacrifice our entire national security for that purpose. So I understand them, and it's a terrible situation that involves a lot of clear-eyed policymaking, including from our own administration, Biden messaging to Netanyahu and continuing to say what we think is reasonable, given frankly how much support we've given to Israel. I think it's justified for us to do that, but let's not do what the Irish leader said, saying that the children released, they were lost, and then they're found as if they got lost on the woods to grandmother's house or something. People of that leftist bent on social media just denying any malice on Hamas's part is really sickening.
Yeah, some people earlier claimed there were no hostages. It was all fake, but now we see human beings be released. Laura, New York Times says Bibi's war cabinet debated for weeks whether to take the deal. Some were opposed, didn't want to go along with a ceasefire, because obviously they were worried that such a stoppage of the bombing and other attacks would give the Hamas military a chance to regroup.
And that's the balance that they see. And I think one of the challenges in reporting on all of this is that you have the fog of war, and then you also have the fog of negotiations. We don't have the information that these leaders have as they're engaging with militants in tunnels and through the Qatari government. So this is a really complex negotiation, and it's difficult for the public to digest it because we don't have it all. Now, certainly, Benjamin Netanyahu's government has been rightly criticized for their lapse in judgment and their lapse in security that would have led to anticipating this attack. He also has members of that cabinet that will be making these hostage negotiation decisions are from the far right. So they have in the past and continue to be lean heavy into the hawkishness rather than negotiation. And I think that's where the international pressure from the U.S. and others came in to be reasonable and to try to do what is best for the hostages, the Israeli people and the Palestinians.
Right. Robby, you kind of touched on this earlier, but to expand a little bit, the Biden White House let the press know that Joe Biden had been privately pressuring Bibi Netanyahu, and sometimes publicly as well, that he wanted a temporary truce given the soaring death toll in Gaza, because I think that contributed, fairly or unfairly, to world opinion turning against Israel.
Right, and frankly, I mean, we have to think about, the images coming out of Gaza. It is horrific, and we want, Israel ultimately wants to be a safe and secure place. We want America to be safe and secure. And, I worry about years from now, just beyond the humanitarian toll, Palestinians who've lost friends and family members, do they turn to terrorism years after this, to continue their war against Israel because of the injustices they've suffered? Now, Hamas is absolutely responsible. They launched this. They attacked, killed, tortured innocent people. But of course, the bulk of the Palestinians are also to some degree hostages of Hamas, which is an autocratic government that hasn't held elections since before most of them were born today. So, as Israel pursues justice and tries to get its people back and tries to eliminate this terrorist organization, it does need to think, in the long term. We don't want to make the problem worse. We want to solve the problem, and that's going to take some level of negotiations. But it's difficult because Hamas is a bad faith actor, and that's something everyone in the media needs to recognize, especially.
Absolutely, and Hamas, I would go further than an autocratic government. I would say it's a dictatorship, obviously, and many Palestinians may support it, many Palestinians may not, but they don't have any power to do anything. So, Laura, this is something of a political win for President Biden, reinforced by the latest release today. And yet the coverage reflects how unpopular his handling of the war is, especially among younger people who dislike Israel and favor Hamas, which means favoring the destruction of Israel, because that's in Hamas's own charter. It's not speculation by anybody other than the people who use the chant, from the river to the sea.
Well, I haven't heard young people siding with Hamas. I think what young people and others who are anti-war feel is that there is a humanitarian and human cost in war, and they have a distinct aversion to that, having grown up with wars that they perceive to be unsuccessful. And so when you look at, and I think that the data bears that out in terms of the Palestinian toll, the toll on children and women, which in less than 2 months has exceeded the number of women and children killed in 2 years in Ukraine. The facts on the ground with the density of the Gazan population and the Palestinians there, this truly has been devastating. I think you see that reflected in their anti-war stance. And I think the media has a responsibility to cover that, as well as to cover the devastation that we see with the families, with the hostages, and the threat to Israel's security. That balance is incredibly hard to strike, and certainly will impact public opinion here in the Arab world now and in the future.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that, because I think there are plenty of young people who show up at pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas demonstrations and are siding with the terrorists, because that's what's going on here. Let me just, there was so much bad publicity about Israel's attack on the Al-Shifa hospital. Let me put up the security camera footage that was found on October 7th, the day the war began, of Hamas rushing 2 hostages into that hospital. So the idea that the hospital was not used for anything other than medical treatment of sick and wounded patients, I think was completely disproven by this, as well as some of the discovery of underground tunnels. Up next, a live report from Israel on the agonizing hostage situation.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.